Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks so much for watching the Biltmore Church Podcast today. I want to give you a heads up that we had some technical difficulties this week with some of our cameras. And so if you're watching today on YouTube, you're going to catch that it's going to look a little bit different today, but we're still going to bring you the audio of the podcast. Thanks so much for bearing with us through this week's technical difficulties. Here we go. Welcome to the Biltmore Church Podcast. Our church exists to glorify God by making disciples of Jesus who reach up, reach in, and reach out. And this podcast is a resource that's hopefully going to help you do just that. We're back in our James series. It is amazing. We were just talking about this before we went on air. I'm at least surprised. It just feels like it has flown by the last however many weeks, 9-10 weeks that we've been in this series. Plus a little bit extra, so it's crazy that we're nearing the end of this amazing book of the Bible we've been journeying through. But today we're going to have an awesome conversation about James chapter 4, maybe James chapter 5, verse 1, bleeds over a little bit. One day they're going to let you change where the chapter and verses are in the Bible.
I think they should.
Waiting on you to fix that.
I think they should. I'm just going to write my own one.
It's the PB translation.
Yes.
PB translation,
All of a sudden it's a different translation.
Yeah.
But we're going to be jumping back into God's Word today. Quick introductions as always. I'm Christian. I'm here. I serve on staff here, and I'm here today with our lead pastor, Bruce Frank, and Michelle Myers, who is our discipleship coordinator. If you've been listening, you should know who we are by now, hopefully. The same crew coming back every single week. So let's start with this. Pastor, you covered a really dense section of James chapter 4 on Sunday. So we'd love to hear from both of you maybe what stood out from hearing the word, from preaching the word, from talking to people afterward. Whoa, that was a triple rhyme that I did not plan on doing, but here we are.
Hey, there's new glasses.
Here we are. Nope, but it is a new hat. So
It's a new hat?
close
That's
enough.
what it was.
I got to get some cool glasses like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to get my eyes checked. Those are like yuppie glasses. That's good. I got to get those. I got to get some stylish ones.
The yuppie glass.
Well, kind of.
Join the club.
Good joining up. So, go ahead. What stood out?
Oh my God. I was just talking about how I needed you to talk slower because I had too many things to write down.
Okay. What
Yeah.
stood
Much better.
out?
Wow.
You like that?
Be a 3-hour
That was
message.
great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yep.
I think the thing that I loved the most was, what is God's will for my life? That's a question that people ask. I think they ask it so well intended, but I love that you gave us a better question. It's just what is God's will, and end the question there. And if you will make it your mission to know what God's will is and be involved in God's will, then his plan for your life will unfold.
Yeah.
But if we want, the unicorn, the rainbow, the whatever, like we want the special thing, but really it is getting involved in the general assignment to all believers that those individual assignments come. So I loved that reminder.
It's good for me also when you go back, you talk about God's will. One of the biggest misconceptions I've always thought is that people look at it. What Michelle was saying is like they almost get paralyzed when they talk about God's will. It's like, what if I make the wrong choice here, and what if I choose the wrong college and don't ever meet you can just play this whole thing out. It's like, what if I was supposed to go to UNC and I ended up going to UVA and all this kind of, and then I missed the person I was supposed to marry and the major. And so one of the cool things is just realizing that what Michelle was saying in the big picture, and then just the safety net underneath that sometimes there's multiple good godly options.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes there is, as long as, and the safety net is where like, all right, I want to do it for the glory of God, for the advancement of the mission. And there's oftentimes like, all right, you can live in that neighborhood. The fact is you're going into that neighborhood with the fact that, all right, I'm on mission with God. And that's why we talked about, like, a lot of people's life verses, that Proverbs 3. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make not your door straight, but your path straight. And so the idea that God's will is like a path. I'm walking along the journey.
Right.
And you probably make 1,000 decisions a day. And so there's times, I was like, God's like, hey, you can, whichever one you want to go to. And there's a lot of times, you see like Paul sometimes, he's wanting to go someplace and God's like, go. And other times like, no, don't go there. Don't go there. Come on over here. And that's a freeing thing. But it is very important to, first of all, get what the passage is talking about is like, make a choice. I mean, am I going to be the double-minded man that James is always talking about? Like, I want God's will, but I really don't. I want the best with a mate, but I'm not dating like that. Or just all those different, that's the double-minded way, and that's when you get in the weeds.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you mentioned on Sunday was we often forget how brief our life is. Yeah, the classic illustration with the rope, which always hits home, right? Of just putting that eternal perspective into place. And I think you drilled in that, hey, we're pretty good at resisting acknowledging the brevity of our own lives. So how would you say living with that eternal mindset, kind of like the rope illustration, how does that help us live more purposely on a practical level?
What's that? Just knowing the brevity? I thought when I looked in here, there was like a threefold deal. I'm not sure I can remember. One of them was the uncertainty, and one of them was the brevity, and there was a third one I can't remember what we talked about. But the uncertainty is like you don't even know. There was such confidence in verse 13. It's like, all right, we're going to do this, and that's just normally we call that planning. But James is making the point, but you're doing your planning without planning with God, and so you got all this stuff, and you're so certain this is exactly how it's going to go. And so there's really no humility in verse 13. It's like it's almost like the farmer in like Luke 12, where he's like, I'm going to build bigger barns. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. And that's where James is like, you don't even know what tomorrow is going to bring. It's like, we are very dependent. We're just very dependent on a lot of stuff going, right. Now God uses your hard work. We're talking about, Michelle has a genius IQ and all those things before we got on there. I mean, he uses those things, but bottom line, we are still dependent.
Yeah.
I mean, you like people, men and women who've made, let's say, a lot of money. Sure, they use their smarts and their entrepreneurial, all that kind of stuff. But they also were born here. They had nothing to do with what country they were born in. They had, maybe their timing was just perfect for the stock market or their business. There's all that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
Really what you just like, you don't know what tomorrow will bring, and then just your life is a mist that appears for a little time. And I think the part that resonated is like, we really don't know. I mean, you can be 20 and not have much time left. You can be 50 and have a lot of time left. You just don't know. And I think when you're young, it's hard to think that way. You have to concentrate at it harder, I think. I don't remember even as a new believer. I remember, and it was even then it was more an arrogance. I remember I remember making a statement. There was a girl I was dating at Tech, and she was going to go to seminary. And I remember telling her, it's like, why would I go waste 3 years of my life when people are going to hell? Why would I waste 3 years because 3 years of seminary? Why would I go do that when people are going to hell and they need to hear the gospel? And I look back and I'm like, dude, how arrogant was I thinking, number one, I don't even know what the next 3 years is going to be. And that I was you know what I'm saying? That whole.
Yeah, you were the solution to everything.
Yeah, I was the solution to the problem. Yeah. I ended up going to seminary for a long time. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. I think as you get older, it does kind of like the point. The crude illustration of he's like that roll of toilet paper. I mean, the more it gets unrolled, the quicker it rolls. And that's the way it is. Yeah. The older you get, it seems like it goes by quick. It drags when you're a kid, gets a little bit quicker when you're a teen. But I mean, when you hit 50, it's like, everybody's like, somebody hits 50 and they're like, oh, I'm middle-aged. I'm like, I don't want to break it to you, but there's not a lot of 100-year-olds around. You're already past middle age. Yeah. I mean, if you really want to look at statistically. So, but again, you don't know. The thing is, like, we want to leverage. You want to leverage it, and that's what I thought. Just want to leverage it for the kingdom. Because we have a lot. Was it Amy Carmichael? Just like we have so long to celebrate the victories, and just a short time to win them. So it's like that's where the West Stafford quote is like. Oh, he's such a. I'm asking him to adopt me, and he hasn't adopted. Like, could you adopt me into your family? Gosh, man! But when he said that, because if you know him, he's so winsome. He's like, I can't wait for Jesus to wipe the tear from my eye, but I also want him to have to wipe the sweat from my brow. And I was like, okay. And this is a guy that was the head of Compassion for, boom years. He's been on our staff before, but he's such a. Have you met him? Have you met West Stafford? He is like.
I remember meeting him. It was like.
Oh, dude! And it's just so authentic.
Yeah.
I mean, I could. Yeah, probably not for this podcast. I could give you a couple of stories where people had to follow after him. Oh. And I felt so bad for him.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, he came across like.
No, thank you.
He came across like Jesus, and you did not. You came.
Yeah.
So it's like, I want to sponsor another child.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to drill into something you were hinting at there with the whole understanding that truth that it's not about you, and how much that unlocks for the believer. Michelle, you and I were even talking about how much this is a thing for, you mentioned it just a second ago, for younger generations.
Yes.
Millennial, my generation, Gen Zs.
Gen Z, they call this main character syndrome. Like they have been raised on these social media platforms where it's basically like they walk around in a movie and they're the main character and everything revolves around them, that's the stream that culture is going. Yeah. And then living in a gospel-centered way is completely different. Mm-hmm. And so I feel for these students that are trying to figure it out when they're still trying to figure it out. Yeah. And so I'm just, because you were, obviously the name main character syndrome might be new, but I don't think that it's actually new.
No, I mean, since the garden, that's basically what it is. So,
and I was just thinking about how to encourage like these young adults and the students that are living, because I think that what more powerful witness could you have than living in a way that is about God and others instead? Yeah,
and it's super freeing. Now, again, the default we have both, I think, in the flesh as well as in the culture is always, it's always pulling us. It's like the undertow. It's always pulling us toward it's about me. So every commercial you see, it's virtually every commercial. It's it's about you. Your flesh is like it's about me. But think you were talking about this generation. I mean, I've just barely started that book, The Anxious Generation, and it was talking about the way that social media and the impact that it's had on this generation. Because if it is all about you, and if it rides on you, and the whole world's supposed to revolve around you, and think about what that takes just to have a decent day. Oh. I mean, you got to, if people have got to act right. The stoplights have got to line up where you get greens and not reds. Right. I mean, the traffic. I mean, if it's all centered, that is a miserable way to live, and it's kind of it's in bondage. And the other one is one you got to fight for, but it is freeing. Mm-hmm. It is very. It's like, I can take a deep breath. You know what? Even the trial, even this scubulon that I'm going through or whatever, it's like, all right. If my ultimate purpose is, I tell you, a great psalm is looking at like Psalm 57. When David's going through some tough times, but like 2 to 3 times in Psalm 57, he's like, but be exalted in this situation, So even in the hard times, and we have a lot of people obviously in our region in the hard times, but if the ultimate deal would be, God, if you get glorified by this, and even this week we're going to look and talk about it's the opposite side of the rope. One was about leveraging, but this is the one about, all right, how do you endure, whether it be injustice or the trials? And he's like, listen, this is, we've talked about a lot of times that the hardest part about a difficulty is not the darkness of the trial, it's the duration. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, this next part of the text is like, big picture is there is a day, if you're a Christian, that your trial is not lasting forever. And he starts actually talking about the second coming, which I'm like, all right, somehow I didn't realize that was in James. When I kind of mapped it out, I'm like, this is a whole section on like the second coming of the Lord and how that should be the comfort we have. But so anyway, bunch of stuff in that section I did not see, but it was great reminders. And for me, going back to what I think they're posting it today, probably the first after I got saved, probably the first how to be a Christian, how to live like a Christian, were those diagrams. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now we had a mistake on the diagram we had to correct if you were at one of the services, but that whole, it's basically Bill Bright who founded Crew, and it was the wonderful Spirit-filled life is basically what it was, those 3 diagrams, and that's what immediately, because I was having a hard time. Did you have a hard time? I had a hard time initially trying to figure out how do you make this, because everybody I was reading and all that stuff, I was like, okay, planning. It's not planning really. It's really not about planning. Right. It is, but that's the fruit, not the root. Mm-hmm. And so about Tuesday, I'm like, that's like the, who's on the throne. And that goes back to that whole Spirit-filled life deal that we did at the start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would you say are some of those areas that we're often tempted to place our trust in ourselves rather than in God? When it comes to that, it's not about me syndrome. It's probably a laundry list.
What is it that we have a temptation to place ourselves in the middle versus God in the middle?
Yeah, or even just trusting in ourselves when it comes to, I'm going to make the plans, I'm going to be in control of X, versus putting our trust in Him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that God does expect us to do what we're supposed to do. In other words, it's like, I'm going to trust God for helping me pass this test. You got to study.
Right.
You know, I remember praying sometime we had going. It's like when I was a new believer in college, I was like, oh, Jesus, come back before this tax accounting class tomorrow. I don't know. I mean, I would pray those prayers for sure.
Lord.
Please come back before. You know, but I mean, there are things that he expects us to do. I mean, he expects us to do it, but part of it's a mindset. Is like, you know, my job, if my goal, if my purpose, if the first purpose is to glorify you, if I put that on, it's almost like it's like the big rocks, you know, the big rocks, small rocks.
Yeah.
Who was that? Who was that? That was,
I don't know who's it.
Was that Covey? I think it was maybe Covey.
Sounds right.
Sounds like Covey.
Yeah,
you know, another way to do it was like, you know, when you're tying, if you know, I don't know when I've worn a tie in a while, but if you wear a tie, you got to make sure you get the right button right, or you get to the bottom of the shirt and it's like jacked up.
Yeah.
If you get the first button right, the rest of them go in line. And that's kind of what this comes to mind is like, if I put that on the first button, that's the first big rock in there. The other stuff is going to kind of make its way, but it's that mindset is like, I put the glory of God at the very front. And actually that's what we did in kind of a sidebar. That was something that maybe 12 or 13 years ago as a worship philosophy here really. It's like, we got to do this. It's got to be, because, you know, you go 10 to 15, more like 15 years ago, you know, it was a lot about creativity and can you do this in church and all this kind of stuff. And we finally was like, it's got to be about how do we shine a light on the character and the nature and the glory of God and the gospel. And then we'll try to be creative and make it clear and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like, put that rock in first.
Right.
And then all the other stuff is going to come around it. So I think the same way in life as well. It's like I've put that rock in there first, and then it helps with. I mean, it helps with that. There's not an aspect that doesn't help. It's like even if you get an argument with your spouse, okay, if I'm here for the glory of God and for the good of others, then I'm going to have some humility, which will help apologize more, which takes care of some of the selfishness, which is really the root problem anyway. So what I'm saying is it has a trickle down effect, like nothing else that I've seen, other than that it's about the glory of God has been the number one revolutionary truth, as I mentioned. I mean, I don't know, because, I mean, you went to seminary a little bit later than I did. Did you ever have anybody even point that out in a seminary class?
No.
Never. I never had that. I didn't have any leadership classes. That's a different deal. I think they've started doing that.
Yeah.
But then just the fact it's about the glory of God. Because of the way I came to Christ, I was and still am. It's like I love seeing lost people get saved. So I love seeing people grow. I love seeing grown-ups get saved. But I think even early in ministry, I thought that was I've got to be careful here, because there's definitely a overlap between the glory of God and the mission of God. It's like, well, is it about the glory of God or the mission of God? And it's like, yes. I mean, the mission of God glorifies God. I mean, the cross is the ultimate way that God got glory. So, but early on, it was like, man, if your ultimate thing is like, we're going to get people saved, then you can do some stupid stuff. You can do. So I look back at some of the stuff I did with the right motive, not here as much, but like in Houston, I was like, that's kind of kitschy. I mean, I really want to dress up somebody in a Darth Vader to talk about Romans 7. I mean, it's
hypothetically,
it's not wrong.
Yeah.
But it's like, so just, I would say that, I mean, that is the central theme that you see woven throughout the scriptures, is the glory of God from, anyway.
Well, I mean, it's meant to simplify. It kind of goes back to Matthew 6:33 of seek first the kingdom of God, and then all these things will be added to you. And so that's not easy, but it is simple.
Yeah.
I didn't realize this, but the word priority has been around for a really long time. The plural of that word, though, has only been around for the last 30 years. In the last 30 years, we have invented this priorities of making everything important. And when everything's important, nothing's important. And so just recognizing even the adding of that word into our language and how much clutter and distraction that adds.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a little bit of an offshoot from it, but I love also when the lights go on to our people who are not in, because like three of us, we're professional. We're professional Christians. This is what we do. But it's awesome to see that when you see the nurse or the accountant or whatever, and the light goes on. Because what you were just saying about priority, that's an awesome, I didn't know that insight about the last 30 years, but it wasn't that long ago when you take that Latin word for vocation or voca,
Right.
which is the idea of calling. And just for them to realize that, because that whole thing about, anyway, we're going to get off on a tangent here, but if you look at calling, God has a call on any believer's life, and and they can glorify God in the neighborhood, changing diapers, balancing financial statements, whatever that is. They can do that. They don't have, and I think we have that DNA now. But I know growing up, not growing up, and not growing up in church, but even early in seminary, there was definitely the clergy and the people separation a little bit, kind of that little bit of Old Testament priest and the people feel, and that definitely went over there. It's like, okay, you go do your secular job and then come up here and do your Christian duty.
Yeah.
Especially when churches were heavily programmed.
Yeah.
Right.
This is where the ministry happens, and then you
for sure, yes,
make money to
and that's
survive.
why. And then when that would lead into people getting like they take 4 and 5 and 6 different ministries in the church, which they can't do those very good. They certainly are not going to be in their community if they're up at church 6 days a week. They're not the Little League game, so there's a lot of tangents from this. But I love it when the light goes on. It's like, you know what, I can glorify God at Borg Warner or
That's
at
right. That's right.
Advent or wherever that is.
Yeah, you get so much more fulfillment from that than doing it for yourself too, which is something you alluded to. So let me ask this then. One of the things I was thinking about when I was hearing your message, you talked about wanting to do the will of God. What do we do when we find, hypothetically, this has never happened to me, that we really don't want to do the will of God? That's the place we're in. We know that what he wants, and we don't want to do it. What's the step to take?
Repent. No, I'm just saying, and that is 100% going to happen to every honest believer.
Right.
For sure. I mean, think about it. I mean, it's the sovereign God of the universe, probably going to have some stuff that we don't agree with him on.
Right.
And I mean, there's certainly some questions and all that kind of stuff. But I do think you have to have the mindset of, I know God's good. Even when I know God's good. I know God's sovereign. I know God ultimately has my best interest at heart. And so I'm going to do it and trust.
Yeah.
There will be times of confusion for sure. I mean, right now, with Helene, I went down to a part of town I hadn't been in as far as seeing the disaster, and it was sort of just like shocking all over again, just seeing the loss and seeing, I was like, this place 2 months ago was a tourist, the section I was in down by the village. And I was like, my soul. I mean, and all of those businesses have owners who, we saw Testimony Sunday, from Chantel as well. She was right down that same area. And there's going to be times where like, why, even especially like a person like Chantel who came here for the glory of God, wanted to glorify God in her business, and all of a sudden her truck's floating down the Swananoa River and her business is trashed. And so I'm sure there's been some processing there, but at some point, that's why we've always talked about get the theology about what you believe about God before you go into the trial. And then even if you're in the trial, make sure you're not looking just at the circumstances, look at the cross to get your understanding of God's goodness, that ultimately, you're going to see God's goodness. Ultimately, every believer will say, what, God is good. But sometimes it takes a while to get there for sure.
Yeah.
But to answer your question in a nutshell, do what God tells you to do.
Yeah.
And again, some of this 95% is about who you are in the Bible as opposed to what you do. Now, when I say that, I mean, the stuff when we talk about, like what Michelle mentioned earlier, the will of God, I want to know the will of God, I want to know. And typically there's a good question that is real specific, like, again, taking a job or these things like right there, and they get kind of fresh, like, well, I can't find if I'm supposed to, go with this company or not. But the idea is if I'm going to glorify God, don't have any areas of disobedience that I know of that God's convicted me, so I'm walking with the Lord. The promise is you definitely can get at least enough light for the next step. Maybe not for the next 10 years. Probably, I'd rarely see that.
Yeah.
I think it's grace that he doesn't show us 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
It'd terrify you.
So true.
Think about 10 years ago if they said right now, it would terrify you.
Yeah, no way.
So I think a lot of it's just, that's why it's just a walk.
Yeah.
It's a walk, not a,
That's
we're on a journey, not
That's
a.
good.
Yeah. Well, it's real easy to do the will of God when it's also the will of you. It's a lot harder when your will doesn't match his will.
Yeah.
To trust the gap there.
Yeah. And again, that goes, I mean, it's the awesome deal. And then we'll talk about it a little bit this week. And I'm not sure what exactly means, but think about it this way. Okay, so Jesus dies. I know that some people are getting into was it 3 full days or whatever? So, but either way, dies on a Friday, raises on a Sunday. Now, just something to ponder. Why? I mean, because God could have raised him on the first day, besides the fulfillment of prophecy and the word pictures and all that stuff. I mean, why did he wait 3 days to raise him? I mean, why not 2? Why not 1? Maybe 1 just to make sure it was clear he was dead.
Yeah.
But why? Why 3? Anyway, just something to think about. Maybe a small part of that is, and to think about those 3 days with the disciples. I mean, they were going through, I mean, they'd sold everything, and all of a sudden that dream was dashed. So that was not an easy 3 days. And that's where we find, if in the church age, that's where we are right now. I mean, because he talks about last days, and people are like, well, when are the last days? The last days, calendar-wise, there's like, after the Holy Spirit got sent, before the second coming, we're in that age.
Right.
So we're in the 3 days right now. It's been longer than 3 days, but I'm just saying.
It's a great reminder.
So if you figure that out before Sunday, let me know so
I'll
I
let
can
you know when
include
he's coming back too. I'll figure that out real quick.
99 reasons he's coming back in 1999. Oops.
Sorry, what I meant to say was
200 reasons why he's coming back in 2000. Oh.
It's always going to happen.
Yep.
Always going to happen. 2 more questions. One, you spent just kind of a sidebar on Sunday talking about how important it is to have good and godly counsel around us to, in your words, keep us from doing something stupid. A lot of times when it comes to God's will, our will. So just quick, I know we've talked about this a few times, but just practical steps. How do we make sure we're building good, godly counsel around us to keep us from doing stupid stuff?
I mean, get good, godly people around you. Give them permission. Ask. I mean, especially if you're a younger person. I mean, we have a fairly young church. I mean, it's fairly young, depending on the campus and the service and stuff, but it's fairly young, but not totally young, which is awesome. Because, I mean, if our church was totally 25 to 30-year-olds, I mean, you imagine the collective ignorance in the room with just 25 and 30-year-olds. They haven't experienced anything in life. Not anything, but I mean, so little.
Yeah. Right.
But I would say, if you were like a newly married couple, can you imagine if you were just able to, if you go up to Jim and Carolyn Fuqua, or many of the couples that have 50 years of marriage, not just hanging in there, but I mean, you see them actually liking each other still, and him opening the door and those things. Man, go up to him, introduce yourself, and like, hey, we've been married 4 months. Could we have dinner every couple months? We'll buy, and you just tell us about marriage. Or, if somebody's dealing with, and we do that kind of with like people who are called to ministry, that will kind of pair them up and try to decide. But it's like, man, just anything like that. Just get some people around you. But I would say right now, if you're a young person, just ask.
That's great.
Older people have stuff that would be, they know. And what we're talking about, by the way, counsel is something. Godly counsel is important because you don't want somebody that's going to contradict. But these would be areas of wisdom where you don't, there's not a clear, or they can help you apply what's in there. Because really that's what, Tony Evans, he said, wisdom is basically biblical common sense. How do you take it and then apply it in a everyday way? And that's what, the Fuquas and these kind of people, they can do that because they've got the scar tissue. They've made the mistakes and really learn from theirs. Learn from their mistakes and their good stuff.
That's great.
I can't add anything. That's what we've done.
But you probably,
Yes.
we've all learned, you're a pup. And you're a pup still.
Thanks. That's good.
But I'm just saying, you learn more, both good and bad. I mean, hadn't you learned, take marriage or parenting or whatever.
Right.
Good and bad.
Yes.
You learn from other people.
Yes.
Some of the bad's usually observant, like,
Right.
wouldn't have let, Scooter get away with that or whatever. But then on the other hand, you see a good example, like, okay, I got to file that back because I'm going to need that because I didn't handle that good last time. I'm going to handle it like that this next time.
Yep.
Yeah.
So some of it is asking, and it's like godly counsel. And I would say that also, if you have a decision and there's not a verse against it, this is where people get in trouble. There's not a verse against it. It's not necessarily for it, but there's not a verse against it. But you have, okay, let me be blunt.
Yeah.
So young ladies, if you're dating a guy and y'all getting pretty serious, and he's a believer, may or may not be too fired up about the Lord, whatever. But if you have like 3 or 4 or 5, let's say your parents, your good friends, your pastors, they're all kind of like, not sure about that guy, not sure about that guy. Do not be prideful and blow that off.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that is, if 5 out of 5 or 6 out of 6 are saying that is maybe not never, but not now, this guy is, they see something you don't see. And what we have to do is like, it's not just having people to give us counsel. It's like, do you actually listen? Now, again, could they be wrong? Maybe. Right. But if 5 of them are thinking one thing and you're thinking another thing, chances are you're wrong. Chances are they see something that is very dangerous that and maybe just ask them, hey, why do you say no? And then be teachable.
Yeah.
So good.
That's a great idea. Last question. Practical ideas from either one of you about how to make sure we get past just having good intentions and we actually do what God wants us to do. That's kind of the golden ticket, right? Because it's easy to hear all this and go, great, you have good intentions, and then you move on and you don't actually do anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think accountability is big, of having people that you'll actually talk through this with, of, hey, these are some areas in my life where I think I might be getting ahead of God, or I might be making decisions or planning or doing these things without Him. And so would you pray about this with me? Will you ask me if I'm praying about these things instead of just going about it full steam ahead? But getting accountability is a big deal.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And accountability, sometimes people are scared of that word because they think it's like the FBI checking up on you. But accountability is really just somebody who wants the best for you.
That's right.
And will come alongside and ask how that's going. Is really what it is. So accountability is almost, exhortation, encouragement. Accountability is a little bit though. If you know you're going to be asked, even if it's like a couple of pastors that I'm in a thread with, I was like, hey, I'm going to memorize Ephesians 6:10 to 22. If you want to memorize it with me, and I did that not so that they would do it. I did that because I want them to ask me next time I see them, how am I doing on that? So part of it was like, okay, I need somebody. I need we all kind of do.
Yeah.
I mean, you need this, like, hey, the coach or whoever, your friend, just going to check, hey, how's the memorize? You don't, whether that's prideful or not, but you also don't want to go, I'm in I haven't gotten to verse 10 yet. So, that's why actually I had not really put it in context. So whoever knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it. So it's like, that's where it was like, it's not just, I intend to do that. It's like, if you know to do it, and you hadn't done it yet, which I know that the way we raised our kids, I don't know, whatever, we've always talked about how delayed obedience is basically disobedience.
That's right.
And so I know some people poop on that now. It's like, oh, it's too harsh. I'm like, whatever. But if you know the right thing to do and you're not doing it, then what that's saying is it's sin, because it's just like, I should go. And that happens all the time because people are like, I need to call my sister to tell her I forgive her, or I need to. And it's awesome when they do it and then God blesses. Now, it doesn't always happen that smooth. I had a guy 2-3 weeks ago. I'd had lunch with him like 2 months ago, and he was talking about he was estranged from his kids. He was an older gentleman, probably 70. And he's like, I was like, when's the last time you talked with him? And it had been a while, and I could tell there'd been a kind of a standoff. I was like, and he's a new believer. He got baptized this past in the lake this past time. So I think he got saved at Easter. Yeah, he got saved at Easter. And I said, why don't you just reach out, tell them what's happened in your life with the Lord, and own the part, and just ask them to, forgive whatever you want to own. And then he came up a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, and it was one of the ones that kind of went with the text. Maybe it was the early part of chapter 4, but he was just like, hey, I've reconciled with my kids. I've reconciled. They're coming for the holidays or whatever. And I was like, come on, man, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you guys both. I think this is going to be extremely practical and helpful for people listening. It was for me. Pretty confident it's going to be for you too. So thank you both for your time, for your wisdom. A lot of good stuff in there, and want to encourage you to join us on Sunday as we're jumping back into chapter 5.
Yep.
I know there's a lot there.
Verses 7 to 11.
Yeah. Read ahead. Jump in with us. We'll see you on Sunday. As always, you are loved and sent.